Sea monster's really the only choice here. Or that. Just have to get back to your place before it gets cold.
Transistor is an indie darling from 2014, and you can see why. It's not afraid to take chances and tell a less than straightforward story, while putting a novel twist on isometric combat that leads to one of the deepest combat systems I've seen in a long time. Last year, people were praising Celeste, Dead Cells, Return to the Obra Dinn, and Into the Breach in the indie market. But in 2014, everyone had their eyes on Transistor, and Octodad. I was one of those people, but I was watching for another reason. A super giant reason. I discovered indie gaming with FTL. I think this is FTL. Shortly after that, I played Bastion, and I've had my eye on the studio ever since. To be fair to Transistor, I'm going to keep my comparisons to Bastion to a minimum. So, let's dive right in. No main menu. Excellent. So, right off the bat, there's a lot going on. You play as Red, a jazz singer who's had her voice stolen. Immediately, you're going to be wondering who the dead body on the floor is, and why is your sword talking?
Hey, Red. We're not gonna get away with this, are we?
These questions will be answered in time, and I'm going to break down the story a little bit later, but expect to be confused as to what exactly is going on. As for now, your goal is to get out of the city of Cloudbank, and that leads you to finding the Process, the main bad guys you'll be fighting for most of the game. By now, you've probably noticed that Transistor looks great. This is how to make your games look good forever. Create a unique art style. I think the closest art style I can compare the city of Cloudbank to is Cyberpunk, but Cyberpunk is always more grungy. Maybe more cyber opera? Is that a thing? For some reason, it reminds me a lot of that fancy ball they go to in Firefly.
Did you see the chandelier? It's hovering.
What's the point of that, I wonder?
Oh, mangoes.
I mean, I see how they did it, I just ain't getting the why.
I'm just gonna call it cyber opera. Even the parts of the city that most of the public won't see has a clean and crisp look to it. Transistor also takes a lot of cues from Art Nouveau. Look at this, and then look at this. It's hard to really talk about Transistor's second art style without going into spoilers, which is pretty cool, so I'll be talking about that a bit later. The strongest aspect of Transistor's presentation is the music. It's absolutely amazing. Just take a second. I don't really listen to video game music much after I turn off the game, but honestly I've had some of these songs stuck in my head weeks after playing. It all really sets the tone for the adventure. It's very somber and moody. I like how you can even hear Red humming to herself when you enter the tactical mode in combat. And when you finally do get a break, the art style is warmer, more natural, and the music is a lot more relaxed.
So, don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this.
The sound effects all sound great too, mostly just sci-fi tech sounds, but nothing really felt borrowed or like a stock sound.
Damn it.
The voice actor Logan Cunningham returns from Bastion, and he does a fantastic job.
Some kind of break room up there. Guess if you're gonna spend hours poring over files or running half across town, eventually you're gonna need a break.
There are two other voice actors in the game. Now, I'm not saying they're bad voice actors, but
it was nothing personal, you know. You were valuable, handpicked, unique, but one of many.
They just sound bored, and honestly, I hated every second of listening to them speak.
Begin. This is Royce Brackett of the Camerata, communicating via proxy.
The main draw of Transistor was the tactical isometric combat, People often compare it to XCOM. Now, I know XCOM.
Out of time. I got it, right?
This is not XCOM. It's more like the time freezing in Dishonored. You can't really play the game without it either. When you meet the process for the first time, it also leads you to your first lesson. Precision aiming is terrible in an isometric game.
You serious?
Your attacks are also slow to fire, cover is unreliable, and you move just slower than I think you should. God, I hate the movement speed in this game. There's gotta be a better way. And that will do. Your only weapon in the game is the Transistor. Or is it just Transistor? I've seen it compared to a magical staff that casts spells, and that's pretty on point. Except it's more like hacking the enemies than anything else.
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
Shut up and get in the car!
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
Throughout the journey, you'll absorb different people, and they'll give you new functions. You can also get functions from leveling up. On their own, functions act as your powers. See them at the bottom of the screen there. With these functions, you can have a long-range lance attack, turn an enemy to your side for a bit, have a projectile that damages multiple enemies, dash, create a slow orb of destruction, and even summon a robot dog to fight alongside you.
Hey, she's friendly, I think. Hi, Luna.
So, in my books, the combat system is off to a really good start. There's a lot of tools you can use, but there's even more. Every item can be placed into either an active, upgrade, or passive slot, which means that one function that you might not like could be a useful upgrade in another function. Let's see that system at work for just a second. For a bare bones example, we can look at the bounce function. Its basic attack fires a bolt that bounces from target to target for a short time. Now we can add two other functions to it, so let's pick load and flood. I'm delivering it like I didn't set this up based on the script I wrote. These upgrades had their own modifiers. Look at that, it even created a little lightning trail. I didn't even know you could do that. Okay, so now let's change it up. What if flood is the active function and bounce is the upgrade? Now we have a giant ball of death that seeks its enemies and is a lot more far-reaching than its base form. Finally, let's put load into the active slot. Now you have a grenade with robots seeking shrapnel. Now these are just 3 functions. There's so much more that you can play around with. I didn't even show you what sliding them into a passive looks like. These will usually do something like decrease the amount of time before you can freeze time, or give you a shield. To prevent you from stomping the process, which you totally still can, all functions need a certain amount of memory to use. So, the combination we talked about earlier takes up about 8 memory slots, and by the end of your first playthrough, you'll have around 24 slots, so choose wisely. Or don't, I'm not your boss. So now that we know how functions work, let's talk about the time freeze ability. Now, this will let you queue up movements and functions while time is frozen. Each function uses a certain amount of energy, so you need to choose wisely what you'll do. When you unfreeze time, red will execute them all at once. This will leave you vulnerable to enemies for a while your power recharges. So the main goal in freezing time is to do as much damage as you can with the functions you have, and then escape to safety. Freezing time is great because it lets you prioritize targets in a safe manner. Now, the enemies come in all shapes and sizes. Some will buff or heal other enemies, while others will rush you down or lob long-range attacks at you. There isn't a huge number of enemies you face, but they all have completely different functions in combat, so it's not really a detriment. I think the thing that bothers me most about this game, aside from the movement speed, is it's not even really about the gameplay, it's about how people reviewing the game talked about it. I heard so many reviewers saying, "This game respects my intelligence." Now, I'm not the smartest person alive, but I didn't really feel that statement. It didn't make me feel smarter stun-locking this late-game enemy. This isn't magnum opus. So, if this game feels like a slog for you, don't worry, you're not an idiot. Because this game really did feel like a chore to play. At least for the first bit. It's a combination of two reasons. The first is that the combat system is one of the deepest I've played in a long time. However, the first 2 hours of the game are spent with very few abilities and very little in the way of customization. It's easing you in, but it's not really that fun. With the game's already short runtime, it feels like it just begins as the story's ending. Now that's where New Game Plus comes in. Basically, you run through the story again with all your functions and memory, but with more mixed groups of enemies. The second problem is the combat lacks flow. It still isn't fun to be stuck running around awkwardly after planning and executing an attack. The only time I felt the pace of battle come into its own and work was the final boss fight. I really appreciate how this game wants you to experiment, and boy does this game want you to experiment with different functions. You have a health bar, but when it drops down all the way, you lose a function that it's tied to instead of dying. When you lose that function, you can't just go to the next junction and equip it. You need to make it to the next 2 junctions, meaning you'll need to build a new function combo to be back at full force. This encourages you to play around with different combinations, and who knows, you might find a function combination that suits your playstyle better. If you want to learn more about Cloud Bank, the people who live there, and the story, you'll need to switch up the functions as well. Each function has a file attached to them that are unlocked by equipping them in the active, upgrade, and passive slots. These files will reveal a lot of lore about the people who've been absorbed by the Transistor, and if you want to understand the full breadth of the story, then you'll want to experiment with these functions to unlock all the files. I guess we should talk about the story. So, without spoiling anything, I really like this story. I think it takes some time thinking outside of the game to fully understand it, but it's really good overall. So, if you don't want spoilers, which I recommend you go in pretty blind on this story, skip to here. Oh boy, what a ride this game is! So, Red turns back to the city instead of running, and goes back to the concert hall, where the first twist is revealed. The bad guys, called the Camerata, attack you, but your friend takes the sword in the gut for you. This essentially downloaded him into the Transistor, so that's why the Transistor talks to you throughout the game. That kill count at the beginning of the game, Red had nothing to do with it. It's a red herring. So, here's my biggest criticism I have against the game's story. I know I said I was going to keep my comparisons to Bastion to a minimum, so here we go. It's the one. The disembodied voice in Bastion worked really well because he felt like a guide, someone filling in the backstory and commenting on events when you went along.
He sets foot inside one of Celandia's famous watering holes. Inside's old Rondi, the bartender. The calamity got him before his drinking did.
And it added atmosphere to the game. The Transistor does not fill this role. First of all, it felt like he never stopped talking, and he rarely adds anything of note.
We're still here. Look at that.
After the concert hall, you track down the next 2 members of the Camerata, but first your sword gets sick.
Oh, Red.
And you fight a dragon. What? What game am I reviewing? Is it... Okay, it's Transistor. So, you find the next 2 members of the Camerata, and they've gone to the country, as they call it. After you fly back to the concert hall, it becomes clear that the Transistor is used to control the process, and the Camerata need it back to stop what's happening to the city.
If the Transistor doesn't go back in its cradle, then why, you and I both, but we just won't be anything anymore in a little while.
Which at this point is being completely erased. This is the second kind of art style I wanted to bring up. The process is used to alter Cloud Bank to the whims of the citizens through collective voting. However, in Transistor, they're basically on a complete reset of the city, back to factory standards, and it's portrayed wonderfully. It looks so odd, especially when juxtaposed against the beautiful art style. You return to some previous areas to see how they've completely changed, which is the kind of backtracking that I like. Then you go after the final member of the Camerata, Royce. He greets you at the entrance of his district in this weird TV that floats around. This is where you can experience some of the more surreal levels in the game. Royce tells you that together you can stop the destruction of Cloudbank. When you get to his lab, you put the transistor into the cradle and then something happens. Now, I have my theories about what exactly happens here, but I think it's cool to let you come up with your own conclusions. Red and Royce are out in a field and he begins to talk about how there's only one way back into Cloudbank. Then you gear up and fight against someone who can also freeze time.
Who gets to go first? How about me?
Oh god, I didn't plan for this.
Well,
I like this boss a lot. It's a good test of your skills against someone who has the same powers as you. After you defeat him, you're teleported back into Cloudbank, where Red can now mold the world to whatever she pleases. After changing a small part of the city, Red goes over to the dead body of her companion, and then this happens.
please don't. Wait. Red!
Oh shit. She's transported to another simulation where she's in a field, whole and together with her husband. And then they start playing probably my favorite song in the whole game. So, there's a lot of moving parts in this game, and I want you to try and get something out of the story by playing the game, so I'm only going to elaborate on the main storyline and its ending. Is it a good ending? Yeah, it is. Is it a good twist? I mean, no, not really. But does the twist make sense? Yes, it does. So, the first thing to note is Cloudbank, if you haven't guessed it by now, is a simulation. A simulation where everyone is living their best life. You can even vote on the weather.
Rain's not even on the ballot.
Now, by the end of the game, Cloudbank has been completely reset. Now, this whole time we've been listening to the Transistor, who has it in his head that we're gonna go get revenge on the Camerata for stealing Red's voice and return the city to normal. The problem is, since Red is a silent protagonist, we never know what her actual goal is. Although it's quickly established that she's running the show when she turns back to the city instead of running. The ending is letting us know her real motivation was to return the man in the Transistor, who is her husband, back to her. We learn from Royce that no one who enters the Transistor comes out. So, after she returns, she doesn't kill herself, she downloads her consciousness into the Transistor to live on with him inside of it. Now, why wouldn't she just return Cloudbank to normal? Well, as stated earlier, Cloudbank is a city where everyone is successful and living their dream life. I think it's because their relationship was something that wasn't given to Red in the simulation. It was something they built together. It was the only thing she really wanted to go back to. Corny? Yeah, absolutely. Good? I really enjoyed it, but your mileage will vary. There's still some parts of the story that I'm not exactly a fan of, especially in the very beginning, but those would just be nitpicks. Again, there was a lot I didn't talk about, and I feel it's best you experience it and read into it yourself. That's Transistor, a beautiful self-contained story with a fun gameplay twist. As for a sequel, I hope one never happens. Not everything needs to be carried out and dragged through the dirt until it barely resembles what it once was. And as for Supergiant, I really want to see them take on a game that doesn't have combat as a main focus. However, I understand Pyre is a sports game, so they thought so too. I really do recommend you do play Transistor if you like indie games or you like story in video games. Or if you can find it on sale. Normally you can get it on your PS4, Switch, PC, and I'm pretty sure even a brick of a PC can run it. And it's only about $22 Canadian, and Supergiant deserves your money. However, if you watch this review and were completely turned off of Transistor, I think that you should go buy Bastion. I replayed it for this review, and it's more action-oriented. It's also amazing, and it's worth your time. Thanks for watching to the end. This is my first video, and it means a lot that you stuck around. If you like this review and want me to review a specific game, you can tweet at me, leave it in the comments below, or just email the channel. Thanks again for watching. Alright, up next I'm going to be reviewing a horror game from Supergiant Games. Wait, Supergiant? Super large. Super huge? Super ginormous. Super massive?